This never happened to me before in my life except this one time, but I heard not an audible voice. The Lord spoke to me and he said, if you don't see your son again, will you still follow me? And then I heard it again. If you don't see your son again, will you still follow me? And of course, having a relationship with God, I said, really, Lord? I go, you're really going to ask me that question right now? I go, we're trying to find Josh. And it was just silent. And then I knew he was waiting for an answer. And so I had to really stop and ask myself that question seriously. And so I finally had to answer the question.
Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast, episode 103 of the Audacious Faith Podcast. We are on location today in Monrovia, California at Calvary Chapel, Monrovia, and I am very excited to be here with a good friend of mine, Pastor Steve Martinez, and we're going to get some time getting to know you today and kind of sharing with our audience. I want to thank you, first of all, for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Thanks for coming out to the church and looking forward to it. Yeah,
it's going to be great. So we're going to start off right now, and maybe just for the people in the audience that are watching that don't know you, or even those who do, maybe we're going to find out a little bit more.
Yeah.
Maybe share a little bit about family upbringing and definitely how you came to faith.
Yeah. So I'm an assistant pastor here at Calvary Chapel, Monrovia. I've been here about 10 years. And God has just done amazing things here at the church and personally in my life, being a Christian and following Christ. And I was raised in a Christian family. My grandparents are Christians. So in a sense, honestly, I just feel blessed, like the fruit on a tree. I didn't plant the seeds. I didn't plant the tree. I didn't make it grow. But I think my grandparents, parents are part of that, of course, that Lord used. But I just feel the blessings that come from a generational family of being Christians.
Yeah.
And so, but I enjoy being a pastor here, and God's done some other things in my life too, in social work and different things.
Awesome. So kind of maybe describe your position here, the ministry that you do here.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us a little bit about the church. I mean, it's a great church right here at a good location in Monrovia.
Yeah.
I know it's growing. What do you like the most about it, about what you do here?
Yeah. So Pastor Richard Shork, he's the senior pastor here, and the Lord gave him a calling to come out to this area maybe about 20 years ago. And then I joined about 10, 12 years ago. But he's a really good man. I've served under him for some years now, and he really has a heart for the people. Teaching the Word of God is most important, and seeing lives changed for Christ. And so I want to be a part of that. Right. He's been real supportive. I do a lot of the counseling here for married couples, premarital counseling, family. I support him. I do a lot of the weddings or funerals that may come up during that time. So I just love being here. It's a neat body. Missions is real strong here. Children's ministry is real strong here. So, you know, we see sports teams, and if you happen just to be on a team that kind of wins a championship, that's the goal,
right?
And so I kind of feel like we're winning championships for Jesus, in a sense. So
the best kind, right?
It's nice, yeah. He's our MVP, but yeah, we're just on this trying to participate.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, let me ask this, because kind of the question that comes to my mind is you base that because you grew up in a ministry-based family, right? And you have that background. And now you're serving as, you know, an assistant pastor here. How has ministry changed over, say, your childhood? Because obviously, I mean, the word doesn't change.
Yeah.
But methods change.
Yeah.
So are there stark changes? I mean, they're not necessarily better or worse, but with the times, maybe?
I think so. I mean, in terms of my upbringing, I grew up in a traditional Baptist church, and so we used, of course, hymns and wearing suit and ties at church, and that's great. Love that. From my experience was when I became a young man, I attended Calvary Chapel, and for me, I enjoyed the worship. I never really saw worship with guitars.
Yeah,
and it was like, rock and roll and church were separate. But for someone to bring in kind of the rock and roll style and then Christian contemporary music, man, that really got me. And so that really just reignited my heart for the Lord as a young man.
Yeah.
And so I think it's changed in good ways so that young people can be excited about the Lord. And
Amen.
I think as older Christians, we need to be ready to make changes, not be the old wineskins all the time, but to be new wineskins all the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you go through, I'm curious, because I did, when I first went to church in the 1980s.
Yeah.
And again, a traditional Baptist church, like what you're saying. Loved so much of that.
Yeah.
But it was drilled into my head that anything with a beat and anything with a drum was of the devil.
Okay.
You know, it was just bad.
Yeah.
When I first started hearing music such as, I moved to another church and then was a youth leader. And I had youth leaders who were listening back at the time, Michael W. Smith, Stephen Curtis Chapman, all these types. And I'm thinking, how can you listen to that and be a Christian? That's how it was drilled into, until I started to hear the lyrics and the content and all of that. So did you go through that phase too, where it was really drilled early? Like where you were thinking, when you first started to sing that worship, like, wait a minute, is this okay?
Yeah, I think so. I was blessed in the sense that growing up with the hymns, my mom had a wonderful voice, almost like an opera-style voice.
Okay.
And she would sing often. So my dad was a pastor, and then my mom would play the piano and sing.
Okay.
So it was a pretty cool growing up as a kid, seeing like that 1-2 punch.
Right.
You know, they say Shaq and Kobe are the best 1-2 punch. Of course, I grew up with Kareem and Magic. But no, my mom and dad together in ministry. I love the hymns, of course, hearing my mom sing. But no, you're right. Later, when I did social work and worked with young people, then I started finding some music that they could relate to. I remember like in the 90s, I found Christian rap started becoming popular across the country. And there was some groups even in the East Coast, and Cross Movement. And this is before Lecrae, but... So yeah, I got excited about Christian worship, contemporary things for wants to inspire young people.
Yeah.
So I think obviously God can use music in different ways for His glory.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's such an integral part. So did any of that musical, you're talking about that musical background, your mom and everything, did any of that rub off on you or?
No. So I tried about some years ago. I picked up the guitar and tried to learn guitar, and I struggled. The church I was going to, they were pretty smart. They would take anyone trying to learn guitar. They would put them in the little like 3-year-old classroom. And play songs for them, children's songs, so that if you were really bad, most 3-year-olds probably couldn't tell the difference, it's a good way to start.
They're singing off key also, so it doesn't matter, right?
So after about a year of trying that, I wasn't too good. I put it down. But what I didn't realize that God was going to do with that is my daughter was watching me. I have 2 daughters and a son. So she picked up the guitar and just took off. And it came natural to her. And we prayed to give the Lord to give her a voice, and the Lord blessed her with a voice. So that's one of the cool things about the Lord is I never saw that coming. I didn't know God was going to use my failure, in a sense, but the desire I had, He was going to give it to my daughter.
Sure.
And she just took off with it. And so what a blessing it was to hear my daughter, to have worship in the house. And to hear her playing songs and singing songs in the house and in her room, practicing, that was such a tremendous blessing. And today she helps lead worship at her church.
Awesome.
She's married now. And so what good gifts that God has for us if we're just willing to be patient.
Right.
Yeah.
So He doesn't waste anything, even a failure on guitar.
Yeah.
He still puts it all together. Right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, your background, you haven't always been doing a ministry position in the church as far as a paid position like you are right now. You had a different what was your background before that?
Yeah, so I credit, I mention my mom and dad a lot just because they were such huge Christian figures in my life.
Right.
And my mom always told me, I'm gonna help people, and work with people. So I did social work out of college. I went to UCLA, graduated in psychology, mainly just to get the degree so I can work with people, and went into social work. I worked at a juvenile placement center for many years, These were kids that were sent there from juvenile hall. And it was not a locked facility. They could leave, but then they'd be rearrested and brought back.
Okay.
So once they realized that, then they stayed. And that was a really neat place to be as a Christian, and to want to be a good role model to those young guys going through that time in life. And so I did social work for at least a good 20 years.
Wow.
before ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you find? I'm curious in there. What was some of the largest factors that put kids in that position to begin with, that contributed to that?
Yeah, good question. Of course, we've probably heard it before, but it is so real. And it's the breakdown of the family, especially the father, and then not being exposed to the gospel and to that God loves them, and God has a good plan for their life. Something happened growing up that just misrepresented who God is or life, and then they decided to join a gang. And so when I changed some jobs, I was actually did gang intervention in locally between Pasadena, Monrovia, Duarte, Azusa. So interesting job. My job was to go find gang members and introduce myself and offer help in terms of if you need a job, if you need to go back to school to get your GED, if you need some rehab to get off drugs. And then, of course, being a Christian, I would bring them to church.
Sure.
And some would come to know the Lord. So that was a great blessing to be able to be a part of that. Yeah.
So what was your reception when you normally do that? Here you are just approaching somebody.
Yeah.
At first thought, a lot of people would probably think, oh, wow, very dangerous, probably a poor reception.
Yeah.
I'm suspecting, though, that maybe you got better receptions quite often than people would think.
Yeah, and of course I credit the Lord, because it wasn't always easy. I can remember being in neighborhoods where there was drive-by shootings and times where it might have gone down even when I was there, and had to kind of run for cover.
Yeah.
And so I had to be careful the places I was at, and but the Lord was always with me. One time I was wanting to go out on a Saturday. I was at a park where there was no gang activity, asking the Lord, just need to meet a few guys. And then there must have been a gang meeting, because next thing you know, it was like 50, 60 guys. There was a shooting, so they must have had a gang meeting. All those guys are there, then just me in the park. And I was like, okay, I hope these guys don't think I'm like a narc or undercover, because I'm not very undercover here by myself. But I was praying, Lord, all I need is one guy. And I heard someone speaking, one of the guys, and I recognized his voice. And I turned, and it was a young guy I used to work with. So I approached him. Is this you? And he goes, hey, and he goes, his name, Samaj. I go, Samaj. He goes, Steve, what are you doing here, man? And I told him what I was doing. And he stopped everyone in that gang, and he said, hey, this guy is a good guy, and he can help you. And he helped change my life. So the next thing you know, I'm working with, 20, 30 guys.
Wow.
So I had to develop a caseload of young men to work with for the grant that I was working under. But so God was so good. God just blessed that moment, and he can do that.
Awesome. Let's shift now, talking about what you just brought up and that experience. Now you bring that into ministry, because you said earlier you do a lot of the counseling, you do a lot of the family counseling, you do so I would think that 20 plus years of experience that God gave you out there, now you see the results of when things are right and when they're not and when they're missing.
Yeah.
Are you able to now just like pull all of that experience into what you're doing now?
I think so. I mean, when I was going into social work, and just as a young guy at the beginning, there was one verse that was my favorite verse that I held on to, and that is, of course, it's popular, but it's Proverbs 3, 5 and 6.
Yes.
Chapter 3, verse 5 and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. And I really wanted my life to, to count for the Lord. I really wanted whatever that path was, I wanted to find it.
Yeah.
And I really thought that verse could get me there, trusting in the Lord and acknowledging him.
Yeah.
And God is so faithful to do that. But to answer your question, so when I started, well, let me backtrack just a moment if I could.
Sure.
I didn't want to go into ministry. I wanted to go into ministry. I didn't want to be a pastor.
Okay.
And so I told the Lord, when I was a young person, Lord, I'll do anything you want me to do. I love you. I'll serve you. I just don't want to be a pastor. And so we kind of had that, at least I thought we had that condition set.
Okay. I'm curious, though. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm curious. Why did you not want to be a pastor?
So I've thought about that, and I don't know exactly, but my dad was a pastor. My grandpa was a pastor. Great men. God used them. So I'll say two things. One, it's not easy being a pastor.
True.
And even in the church, sometimes you come across people that maybe my parents learned later they couldn't really trust. And so I saw that, the two sides of people sometimes in church. I saw that. But also I think I respected the calling so much that I didn't want to presume that I should or could be a pastor because my dad was, my grandpa was.
Okay.
I didn't want to assume that means I'm supposed to be. So I'd rather avoid it. That way, Lord, if you call me. And so maybe, I wouldn't say like I was like Jonah running away from God, but I was running away from the position, the title.
Got it.
So the Bible says in James chapter 3, I believe, let not many of you become teachers because you will be held to a higher standard or a higher judgment.
Yeah.
And I don't want that.
Right.
So, because I know me, I'm a sinner.
Yeah.
How can I, a sinner, attain a level of teaching God's word? I would rather not, but God had other plans.
Right. Now, was there because I kind of remember this myself, when all of a sudden the first day that you get that title, was there just like an added pressure in your mind all of a sudden? Like, oh, wow, now I was careful before, but now everything is watched.
Yeah.
I mean, was it kind of different in your mind at that moment?
So I think, I guess I realized, like in the Bible, Timothy, where Paul encourages Timothy, Timothy, your family was Christian, your grandma, your mom, they laid hands on you. You have the anointing. What does he say? Don't let your youth get in the way. Don't let people get in the way if you've been called by the Lord. And so, so God has a good sense of humor. So what I didn't realize God did, because I wanted to serve a ministry, he had me serving in all different ministries, the children's, the ushers, missions trips, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Marriage ministries and youth ministries, I really enjoyed it. What I didn't know is God was setting me up.
Yeah.
He was preparing me in every level of the church ministry except being a pastor, because one day he was going to have me. So I started teaching a home fellowship for about 5 years.
Okay.
And then I started teaching at the Bible school that I had attended. Calvary Chapel, Golden Springs has a Bible college. That's what really awakened me to God's Word.
Yeah.
God's Word came alive, like 3D, jumped off the pages into my mind and my heart. And I couldn't get enough of God's Word. I just loved it so much. And my wife and I we had some difficult years early in our marriage of just trying two different people becoming one. And so that was perfect timing. God's Word really ministered to me during that time. And that's why I can help married couples because of the struggles we had early in our marriage.
Sure.
And so when I was teaching, people say, hey, you're a good teacher. You should be a pastor. And I kept hearing that over and over and over and over until finally it was my mom, before she passed away. She had actually had Alzheimer's in the last few years of her life and really couldn't communicate as much. Sometimes she didn't remember who I was. But one particular time when she couldn't remember me or was in the severe stages of Alzheimer's, I had a conversation with her, but it was a one-way conversation. I would just talk to my mom, but she wouldn't talk back. And I just threw it out there, Mom, I think I'm going to be a pastor. I think God's called me, and I'm going to answer the call. And she stopped what she was doing, and she looked at me, and she said, well, it's about time.
Wow.
And then she went back, and then there was no more conversation with her at all. And it's like the Lord gave me just that moment.
Right.
because I think she'd been praying for me. I don't know. Knowing her, she'd probably praying for me to be a pastor.
Right.
Because her dad, her husband, my dad was, and then her father, she loved her father a lot. Her father, my grandpa, was a missionary and planted Spanish Mexican Baptist churches in Mexico and in California. So I think me becoming a pastor fulfilled something in my mom too. And then after that, after I submitted, then it just kind of went from there. But yeah.
That's pretty awesome. You know, I've heard a few stories like that where someone, you know, they're having the Alzheimer's and but that spiritual part seems to be the one thing that stays in there.
Yeah.
You know? And
yeah, praise God.
Yeah, it's amazing that God gave you that like moment. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. And the thing that the Lord gave my mom was she still remembered all the songs, the hymns. So she didn't remember your name. She didn't remember a lot of things. But if you we spent most of our time together just singing hymns. Okay. And she would sing.
Yeah.
And so
the voice was still there, huh?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So what a joy. Again, how good God is in those times of life. But yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's shift to the family topic. You do a lot in family ministry. You just mentioned that some of the early challenges, you know, isn't it amazing how God does that? I think you've already touched on this, whether it's a pastor or anyone else serving in ministry, God uses, a perfect God uses imperfect people, right?
Yeah.
And even the struggles and the challenges that God then takes us through, there's a purpose.
Yeah.
Right? So what are you seeing today? What are some of the things that probably come up repeatedly that you're finding families need help with or need to focus on?
Good question. Of course, the father and the wife, the father and the mom need to commit their life to the Lord. Okay. To submit to each other. There was a verse in Peter that talks about submitting one to another, and that God gives grace to the humble, but he resists the proud. Right. And so when a husband and a wife humble themselves to God and humble themselves to each other, then God can really begin to work in that family, in that marriage. And especially, I believe that when the parents submit, at least I found in my case, and this was true for me, when I finally submitted to the Lord in my marriage and my wife as well, that God was just willing and ready to bless not only my marriage, but to bless my children. Okay. That's what threw me for a curveball. I didn't know God was going to give such good gifts to my kids. I didn't see that. And so had our marriage ended in divorce, I never might have not seen that. Right. But so I think submitting to the Lord and to each other, the way God designed, and through that, God will give grace. Yeah. Okay. So do you find that even, I mean, how much do you deal with, I know, for instance, the Bible talks a lot about not being unequally yoked. Yeah. And that's something that a lot of believers make a mistake on, young believers. So how do you counsel those situations when it's already done? Yeah. So there was a couple that came in for counseling, a premarital, they're getting married. And as I'm talking to them in our second session, I'm beginning to think that the guy is not a Christian. Okay. And so then I kind of asked him in a certain way, and he says, "Yeah, no, I've never done that." And so I was going to have to tell them the news that, at least here at the church, I'm not the senior pastor, and so I probably wouldn't be able to marry you then here at the church officially. But before I said that, the Lord prompted me to share the gospel with them. Right. And after about 15, 20 minutes of just breaking down God's love for him and truth, he received the Lord right there in my office. Awesome. Yeah. And so the gospel was presented. He received it. And then I said, okay, now we can continue counseling. Yeah. So I never had to tell him that I was that close of saying that maybe I couldn't marry you. And it's good that you didn't say that first, because then there may have been the temptation, oh, okay, I'll just go along with whatever you're saying. Correct. Yes. But presenting the gospel, I think, is so important so that young people can make their own decision. but it is important. I often share there's three things you're looking for in a spouse when you're getting married. One is the spiritual, that you're both born again Christians.
Yeah.
The second is an emotional, where you can talk like best friends. You can talk about anything. That's important, communicating. And then the third is the physical. There should be a physical attraction to each other.
Sure.
And so sometimes young couples only get two of the three. We're physically attracted to each other. We can talk about anything. We're like best friends. But we're both not Christians. But it's okay. It's going to be okay. So often that if you neglect one of those, often that will come back later.
Sure.
Sometimes and haunt the marriage, and so to speak.
Right.
You know?
Now, curious question here, tied into kind of what you were saying there. You mentioned in this particular instance where instead of going straight to, well, here's a problem, I'm not going to be able to marry you here, and you went to the gospel. Do we have a tendency as believers too often to try to go straight to the behavior and try to correct the behavior when it's God that corrects the behavior? Isn't it maybe more important to go to the gospel first? Yeah. In Corinthians, early on, Paul talks about he's happy that he didn't come with this amazing persuasive words and these theological issues about God or about life, but he came with the simple message that Jesus Christ was crucified for our sins. Yeah. And then he rose from the dead. And that's life-changing. There's no other man that's ever done that, died for our sins and then rose from the dead. So I think there's power in the gospel, and people can accept it or reject it. We're not going to force it. There was someone that came to my house the other day, a real estate agent, a young guy, and I was able to share the gospel with him after he shared with me what he was doing there. And I said, hey, just like you're standing on my door and knocking, Jesus said, behold, I stand at the door and I knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I'll come in. And Jesus said, I'm not going to kick the door down. Right. But if you're going to, I'm going to knock. If you're going to open, I'll come in and sup with you. We'll enjoy fellowship together. And after some time, this young guy received the Lord. But it's important to present God's love and truth in a loving way. So I agree. Right. And then everything else will start to change in time, right? Yeah. So in the family ministry, you've talked about progress in your counseling with families. So do you take steps to try to safeguard in your own family some of the issues? I mean, obviously your kids are getting older at this point. You said your daughter's like already married and all that. Yeah. So maybe stages of change. How do you safeguard, and maybe how is your relationship? This is a little personal, but how is it? I don't want to use the word evolved, but how is it? How has it changed at this stage in life? Yeah. So good question. So what really radically changed my life for the Lord was when my daughter was born. Okay. Yeah. I always knew the Lord. I knew he loved me, had a plan for me, had the idea of it, go to church on Sundays. But when my daughter was born, something clicked, just holding her as a baby, looking into her eyes. And I had a moment when it just looked like she was looking right through me. And all these questions came to my mind as if she was asking me, what kind of dad are you going to be? Are you going to be there for me? Are you going to teach me about God? That was another moment with my daughter. And then I felt this God's love just pour over me. He gave me this gift. Right. And I rededicated my life to the Lord at that time. My first daughter, so I was probably about 28, 29 years old. Okay. And I rededicated my life to the Lord. So what's cool is that every time she has a birthday, she's around 27. Every time she has a birthday, it reminds me, she's a living testimony of me rededicating my life to the Lord. And so my kids have been a huge part of why I follow the Lord, because of how good God has been toward me and my wife and family. So a lot of even like the early challenges that you had, kids really play a factor in that, right? Because it's like, wait a minute, it's more than just. I think parents need to be reminded about this. It's more than just me. Yeah. I may be going through some stuff right now, might be having some issues, but I'm responsible for more than just me.
Yeah.
You know, and so many kids today are put through things that they shouldn't have to deal with.
Yeah.
Because the parents are having trouble.
Yep.
So how does that higher call and that responsibility help people maybe to put their own personal emotions aside and submit to God, as you were saying?
Yeah. So I figured, I was at Matthew 6:33, but if you seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, then all these things shall be added unto you. And so I figured, well, if I put God first in my life genuinely and love him with all my heart, then God will take care of the rest, including my children.
Okay.
But I had to make him a priority in my life. And so once I did that, I just never stopped doing that. Because like you said, when we make bad choices, we know it's going to hurt ourselves or maybe our spouse because we're not getting along. But your kids don't deserve that.
Yeah.
They don't deserve that. They deserve better. They didn't ask to be brought in, as they say, to the world. They don't deserve that. So life was no longer about me anymore. It was about serving God, loving my wife, and being the best possible. I wanted my kids to love the Lord because they realized how much God loved them.
Okay.
I took the word should out of my vocabulary raising kids. So I literally did that. I didn't want to say, you should do your homework. You should go to church. You should read your Bible. That's just someone telling another person what to do.
Right.
I wanted to convince them that reading the Bible was the best. Going to church was good. Loving God was the best without telling them they had to.
Okay.
So I had to be creative in ways with God's power to push them that way, whether they knew they were going that way or not. So that love was the motivator.
Yeah.
And I tried very hard to do that with the Lord's strength, me and my wife. And we've seen the fruit from that.
Right.
Yeah. And so my older daughters serve in ministry. They're married. And my son's in college. And so they all love the Lord. So praise God. I think it's very important for parents to submit to the Lord, to love each other. And God is creative in the way he loves us.
Right.
So we as parents should be creative and not just tell our kids, you need to love God. God doesn't do that with us.
Yeah.
So he's so patient with us.
Yeah.
And I like to tell people the example, on your birthday, you usually get good gifts on your birthday. Well, I like to give gifts to my kids when it's not their birthday, just because I love them. Because God does that to me all the time.
Yeah.
To kind of set that standard, but yeah.
Well, I'm sure they enjoy that.
Yeah, they do.
Everyone likes to receive a gift, right? That's awesome.
Yeah.
So you set out the formula right there that I think is so important, that's in Scripture. Even in the Lord's Prayer, we see, what's the first thing? Your kingdom come, your will be done.
Yeah.
So if we're seeking, that's really, it's challenging because we're so selfish. But if we just seek God's kingdom first, he'll take care of the rest. Maybe not in the way that we always expect.
That's right.
But he'll do it, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Great reminder. Well, let's talk about ministry per se. People now say, okay, well, now you're in a church position, you're in a pastoral position.
Yeah.
Ministry takes place within the walls. But you've done coaching. You done a lot of those things.
Yeah.
Here's my question. Where do you think more ministry really takes place? Inside the walls of the church or outside? Yeah.
So I think it's different. Inside the walls, there's hurting people, hurting Christians. And I like to think of it like the way Jesus described it. They're sheep.
Yeah.
Right? And so we as sheep, that isn't the greatest compliment in terms of the smartest animal.
Sure.
But there are sheep that are hurting. There's people hurting. And
Right.
there's a lot of ministry that takes place in the church. And it's a blessing. It's a privilege to serve the Lord in that capacity. But I love evangelism. I love going out, doing street witnessing. And so that I love coaching young people. So I've always coached like with my kids growing up on their teams. But I was never like a head coach. And I was just talking to the Lord one time years ago, and I was in my garage. And I said, Lord, I've never been a head coach with my son. a couple months later, I get a phone call from the high school where I live, and they said we need a track coach. I ran track in college. I ran at UCLA. I ran the hurdles, and so they found out, and they needed a track coach.
Yeah.
So next thing you know, I'm the track coach at the high school, and I got to coach my son all 4 years.
That's awesome, isn't it?
And I called my brother, who coached way more years track. He also ran track in college at APU here. And I asked him, would you coach with me? He said, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay.
And then his two sons, my nephews. So the coaching staff was me, my brother, and my two nephews.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so what like you mentioned your daughter, how good she was. Yeah, my son was the MVP like all 4 years, and not just because I was head coach, but he was a really good athlete. And so the Lord opened doors at different times. We had a legendary football coach at this is Charter Oak High School, and he's one of the legendary coach who coached for over 50 years high school football, and he passed away. And his son took over the program. Okay. But his son asked me if I would speak to the team because the coach passed away. And he goes, all the coaches are going to leave. You're going to talk to the team. Okay. And I was able to just pour out my heart to all these high school kids, football players, and also give them the gospel, tell them about life and death, that God loved them, and not sure what kind of home they're living in or if they've ever heard the truth. And many of them prayed to receive the Lord, and only God can open a door like that. Sure. That there's no way I could do that. So it's been a blessing to be a coach, and yeah.
So I guess your answer is both.
Yes.
There's a lot that takes place outside the walls and opportunities like that.
Yeah.
And then maybe what's overlooked, and I think you touched on this, is that just because someone's in the walls of the church doesn't mean they're not hurting, right? And I think that I'm thinking back to my earlier days in church, in which you came from the same generation. There was a time, I think, when people came into church and felt they had to put on that church faith. Yeah. We're all good in here. Yeah. We've got the Lord, everything's good. We can't even admit that we're hurting because we shouldn't be, right? Yeah. But people are. Yep. Despite the promises, despite the fact that we have God, it doesn't shield us from the fact that this is an imperfect world where there's struggles. So that's true. So maybe in that type of ministry change, I know, Pastor Richard here is very good. He's very down to earth as far as speaking to people and their needs, and you are as well. Has ministry changed that way where there's more of an acknowledgement? Wait a minute, Jesus did say, if you're weak and heavy laden, come to me and I'll give you rest. Is there more of that type of emphasis now?
I think so. Yeah, I think if you have a good senior pastor that has a compassion like Jesus had. Yeah. Of course, we had that, Palm Sunday, and I just remember that when Jesus was going through Jerusalem, he wept over the city and he had compassion. And so pastors like yourself have that compassion for the people, then that's going to trickle down to the assistant pastors and the leadership to make sure you minister to the needs of the people. Right. Some time ago, someone just told me, when church service is either before church or after church, sometimes you'll find people sitting in the pew by themselves. Yeah. And sometimes after church. And usually that's kind of a sign that they want to talk to somebody, but maybe they don't want to go up and just start talking. Sure. So you kind of look for people in the church by themselves, sitting by themselves, or just double check, hey, how's everything going? And if it's going good, they'll say, oh, it's fine. But if they're hurting, then you just open the door. Right. And then you can encourage them, you can pray for them. And so I think that's important to take that initiative to be there for people in the church. And it's not just coming from the pastor, people helping people. Right. And the pastor needs help. He can't do it all. And he needs help. And so that's why we're here to lift up the senior pastors, pray for them, and to support them any way that we can. But it is important that if we're going to do that, we need to live holy lives. Sure. If you're gonna do that in the church and have a position in the church, not a perfect life, but God has called us to be holy as He is holy, and to make certain decisions in our life to stop doing certain things, or to start doing certain things. Yeah. To have time in our Bible, reading time consistently, prayer time consistently, Before my kids would go to school, we would just hold hands real quick, and I'd say a short prayer. And then sometimes I would have my son, Josh, would you say the prayer this morning? Or Brianna, would you say the prayer? Jordan, or my wife, and just take turns, real short, real quick. We need to encourage each other and pray for each other. And that's important, just like in the church, yeah.
So people in church, in past post-COVID days, when a lot went online, I know you guys are online as well.
Yeah.
And there's a temptation of people to, I don't want to get up and get ready today.
Yeah.
I'll just watch from home.
Yeah.
Right? But I think the example that you're bringing up right there is what people don't realize when the Bible says, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together, right? So maybe, and it could take place in the same service where you needed someone to be an encouragement to you, yet at the same time, there may have been that person sitting by themselves.
Yeah.
And wouldn't it be a shame if they're there looking that 1 week and it's missed?
Yeah.
Right? All it takes sometimes is somebody noticing them.
Yeah.
And making that connection.
That's right. Yeah, I learned a long time ago, I think I heard a pastor say this, sometimes we have to miss church if there's something really important, but you don't want to miss church. What he said was, because the Holy Spirit might show up on that particular Sunday and give out good gifts or blessings or whatever it might be, or answer what you're going through. And you don't want to miss that. And so you're right. You don't want to miss opportunities in the church to serve and to be a blessing to others. Fortunately, I saw that with my mom and dad. My mom and dad were genuine Christians.
Yeah.
My mom used to love going to the convalescent homes and just visiting. And that's where I saw my mom's heart for people. And then my dad would go and just go speak to the guys.
Yeah.
And then my mom would just go up to a woman, just love on her, bring a brush and just comb her hair and or sing. Yeah. And so that's, when you're 10, 12 years old and you see, you see your mom doing that and your dad just doing that, it's just love.
Right, right.
And so love was the greatest thing that I saw, fortunately, in my home. You mentioned something earlier about protecting your family, your kids. And I saw my mom and dad do that too. They protected us. This is going to sound strange, but they protected us from the church. Okay. And that's not to say that the church is harmful, of course. But my dad knew something about just human nature, that there's some people you can trust and some people you can't. Yeah. I remember asking a seasoned pastor years ago, if there's one thing you could do, go back in ministry, would you do something different? And his answer surprised me. He said, if I could go back, I would go back and protect my kids from the church. And he said some of his kids were no longer walking with the Lord. Yeah. He didn't explain what happened, but as a young pastor, I just took note of that. And so serving in the church, but also protecting my kids and my family from, the Bible does say that the devil does come in as a wolf that looks like a sheep in sheep's clothing, or a sheep. Wait. Yeah. He's a wolf, but looks like a sheep. In sheep's clothing. And so that means the enemy is in the walls of the church. Sure. And that, wow. So I just did my best to protect my kids in ministry, and I served in youth ministry. So that was a blessing. Yeah. To do that. So you mentioned that earlier. Just wanted to make that. I think that's important too. So the distinction there would be that even with your kids, I would assume that you would be telling them, well, we live like this, not because you're my kid necessarily, or not because it's going to be looked at bad. We live like this because this is how we live for God, right? Yeah. And I know the same thing as a pastor going through, I have my kids, and it's like, no, this is not the expectation because you're the pastor's kid. This is the expectation because this is just how we believe. Yeah. Right? Right. Yeah, and I'm fortunate that, again, my parents raised us with a lot of love. So what was neat about my parents is that we were always the first ones at church and the last ones to leave. So I grew up, essentially I was born, we were living on a Bible, it was the American Baptist Seminary.
Okay.
It used to be in Covina Hills. A campus was there, and we were living there when I was born. So I was really kind of born in the church.
Right.
And my dad
Literally.
became a pastor when he graduated, and we moved to Nebraska. So my dad was a pastor in Nebraska for about 7 years, and then we came back to California. But just when I was raising my kids, I had one major rule in the house because I didn't want to fight my kids on every little rule.
Sure.
So I basically had one rule in the house, essentially, and that was, can I trust you?
Okay.
Because I figured if I can trust you, then everything else is going to be fine.
Right.
You're going to really enjoy living here. There's a lot of perks and benefits that come with trust. But if I can't trust you as a person, if I can't trust you as my son or my daughter, then you're not going to enjoy living here. You're going to miss out on a lot of benefits and blessings that come from what could have been. So I convinced them that I should be able to trust them. And once I could gain their trust, or I could know I could trust them, then once I convinced them of that, then it just seems, it wasn't perfect, but things just fell in place. And I didn't have to argue about every little thing.
Right.
It was always a trust issue that I would bring up. That went deeper than just the superficial, did you do this, did you do that? So, but
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about the fact that you just recently ran your first marathon.
Yeah.
And you did it a little later in life than I mean, I'm not going to date you here, but you know what I mean? A little later than some people would run their first marathon. And and you did well. You said you finished, right?
Yeah, I finished.
So maybe what were some of the biggest challenges of that? Mental discipline, physical disciplines, everything that was involved there.
So yeah, I'll be 57 this year.
Okay.
So I say that because it's an added challenge to running your first marathon. But before I get to the good part, how that started was about 8 years ago. I became a police chaplain with Monrovia Police Department, and for the first 2 years, I was being called to a lot of deaths, suicides, young people committing suicides, shootings. And it was a lot, and I was getting called a lot. But I wasn't just making the call and going home. I would work with the families through the grieving process, even a vigil. There was a young man that was killed, and many teenagers came out at the skate park. But I was able to share the gospel with them and pray with many of them. But after a while, my wife noticed it was affecting me, and it was affecting me mentally.
Sure.
From going, I had never been through this. I guess that's what. Not to say I'm at that I was at that level, so to speak, but like a PTSD kind of whether it's military or law enforcement. I was seeing what they see, and suicide in young people is probably the worst thing to be a part of course. And so my wife, I love my wife. She has a gift, I believe, of discernment. She said, you need to start working out, go running, lifting weights. And it worked. God used that for mental health, physical health. But I was never a distance runner. So that's what started me running about 5 years ago or more. And so I've just been doing so many running, 5 miles turned into 10 to 15 to 18. So whatever reason, last December, I thought I should run a marathon. Yeah. It's like the next step, I guess. And so I signed up once you pay for it, and I started training. And then I would take my dogs, would go running with me. And then it just became a goal. And I also want to inspire my kids.
Sure.
My kids are very athletic. My daughter played college soccer. My son does track in college. And I want to try to keep one step ahead of them, if possible.
Okay.
And let them know that you can still accomplish things.
Yeah.
And so that was another reason why I ran my first marathon. But it's amazing what the human body can do when you push it to other levels. Your body will respond.
Yeah.
Over time, it will respond. God made these amazing bodies. We only have one body to live, to have.
Yeah.
So the training was not easy, but I'm thankful. One thing I'll just add real quick is I met a lady at the church who said when she ran her first marathon, she asked 26 friends to pray for her. And then she said each mile I'll pray for one of you. I'm going to give you each a mile. So every mile she prayed for one of her friends or family. And so when she told me that, it changed my training. So when I go and I do long runs, every mile I look and I pray for someone else in my family.
Okay.
And that has been a blessing because you're out there for a long time. You could be running for an hour, 2, sometimes 3 hours. Where does your mind go?
Right.
And so now I don't do it all the time, but I spend a lot of time just praying for people. And that's been a blessing.
And is that an example also of, for instance, there's so much mental health challenges that people have today. That's the big field right now is mental anxiety, all those type of things. And when we think of Philippians 4, where it says not to be anxious, but it's not saying that there's not anything to be anxious about.
Yeah.
But what is it telling us to do? Take it to God, and then we look after that, and it talks about, whatever's good, whatever's noble, whatever's, focus on these things. So is that maybe an example on the mind and the body go very much based on where the mind is focusing? And so here you're talking about, hey, instead of me focusing on, man, I'm tired, I'm running, I'm all this stuff, and you're talking with God, you're praying for specific people. I mean, and all of a sudden that other stuff is just like the background, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a time to spend intimate time with the Lord.
Yeah.
And I've found it to be somewhat spiritual. I'll be out running, just worshiping God. I'm finding running on trails.
Okay.
I'll find myself running on trails where no one is out. And the scenery, it's beautiful. Just talking to the Lord.
Yeah.
And being appreciative, because I know there's some people physically that aren't able to do those things.
Sure.
And so, but being appreciative for where God has us in life. And I want to be able to give the gospel for as long as I can.
Yeah, right.
So it's been a good blessing. And then another thing too is they asked me to be the cross country coach.
Okay.
And so my wife told me, don't be one of those coaches that just holds a clipboard and points and says, go. She says, if you're going to have those kids run, you run with them.
Yeah.
And so that was another thing that started the running process. The kids would take off running off campus, and then I would just be, my excuse was, I'm going to track the slowest runner for safety, make sure they get back okay. But in reality, I was just running very slow with the last runner. And then when the kids would turn around to come back, then I joined them on the way back. Okay. But I noticed I was getting better with the kids. One particular time we were at a park, and we're training at the park, but there was a bunch of kids out in the corner behind the baseball field, and I guess they were smoking pot, getting high, and they were saying things to some of our girls as they were passing them. Okay. And they were saying, hey, coach, those guys are saying stuff to us. So as a coach, as a dad, I got mad. I'm like, oh man, to say something to these girls, and these guys aren't living, they're spending their time doing that. So I started walking over there, and I was mad. And halfway through, God stopped me, and he was like, don't go. And I'm like, what? He goes, don't go over there. And I'm like, what? And I'm like talking to God in the middle of the park. So I get my phone out as if I'm on the phone, because I don't want people to think I'm crazy talking to myself. So I pretend I'm on the phone, but I'm like, God, they're saying stuff, someone needs to say something. And he goes, I don't want you to go over there right now because you're mad, you're angry. And he was right. And so I learned something that day, don't handle things when you're angry. Yeah. So I said, okay. So I went home, prayed about it, came back the next day. And the next day I went over and approached those guys, totally different. Okay. Hey guys, I'm the coach out here. Want to let you guys know, if you go to the high school, you can still join the team. And one of the young kids goes, man, I can't run. He goes, look at me, I'm fat. He was a big kid, but he said it. He goes, look at me, I'm fat. I go, oh, don't worry about that. I go, I'll put you in a race where it's just all downhill. And then some kids are laughing, and they're like, and then I go, well, look, guys, if you want to join the team, come out to practice. I said, but I do want to also tell you, I don't know if anyone's ever told you this, that God loves you. You were born for a purpose, that his son Jesus died on the cross for your sins. And he has a plan for you. It's not this, but he has something special planned for you. So the next day, one of those kids shows up to practice.
Nice. Okay.
And says, "Hey, coach, I heard what you said, and I'm tired of my life. I'm tired of, the choices I've made, and I'm just struggling." He goes, "But I want to make something. I want to do something. I want to be on the team. I want to practice. I want to do something." And I go, "Okay, well, you need to get cleared from the school."
Sure.
He goes, "No, I want to start today. I want to run." I said, "Okay, well," I go, "the team is running laps this way. So why don't you run laps the opposite way? So you're technically not part of the team. You're out here on your own, running at the park. I'm giving you advice. I'm not coaching you." He goes, "All right," and he takes off. So he ran 2 or 3 laps just on pure energy. Then I see him at the trash can throwing up, So again, you never know. I'm so glad I didn't go over there when I was angry.
Right.
I thought something had to be dealt with at that moment. And God said, "No, trust me. Let's handle it a different way."
Yeah.
And so I think that's a good example. Even in marriages, family situations, sometimes we get upset, and rightly so. But God said that God doesn't like to deal when we're angry. He has better ways if we are willing to wait for him.
Absolutely. All right. So just a couple other questions really
Yeah.
quickly. So you mentioned you're about to be 57, which I understand because I'm 57.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
But yeah, I haven't been running many marathons lately, except to the fridge, unfortunately. But here's, and by the way, when you mentioned that about running, I thought the girls that I coach in basketball, this would be if they watch any of this podcast, I'm hoping they miss that one part of it.
Oh yeah. Just don't be that coach to point.
I don't know about running up and down all the laps I give them. But anyways,
that's tough.
but here's the thing. Obviously, you talked about health, wanting to share the gospel as long as possible, all of that. So any goals maybe that God's kind of still got in there that you're still after at this point?
Yeah, good question. So I like to set goals in my life just to help motivate myself to accomplish things. Since you brought just the thought came through my mind spiritually, I've been to some missions teams on the church. We've gone to India on 2 occasions, which was such a huge blessing. Such beautiful people over there. So wondering if the Lord has some more opportunity with India. I just taught a class to a Bible school over there, going through the book of Daniel through a translator. And that was a blessing. So for missions. And physically, so it's more of a dream. So the dream is, of course, what I'm learning in the running community is the Boston Marathon. I guess that's the ultimate marathon, I think, in the world. And you have to qualify. And I believe you have to even get into a lottery because there's that many entries. And so I don't think I can physically do it. What's nice is they do it on age range. So I'm in the 55 to 59 bracket. And I don't think I could qualify just starting off now. But I looked at when I turned 60. Between 60 and 65 is another bracket. I could possibly obtain that time and qualify for that. So that's a distant dream. That would take a couple years of training for that goal. But I don't mind that because I figure it would benefit me in the long run. But injuries as we get older are what would hold you back. So far so good. Praise God. Thank you, Lord. My feet are good. My ankles, my knees, everything's pretty good. When I did run the marathon, so for 20 miles, went amazing. God really blessed it, and I just enjoyed it so much. And I was really at a good pace, and I thought, man, this is even better than my training. It was all coming together. And at about mile 20, I started getting some cramps in my legs, my hamstrings, and I had to slow down, kind of stretch, get going again, and then my other leg. So the last couple miles were a struggle. So I had the best and worst of the worlds. The 20 miles was amazing. The last couple miles were a struggle. But, I'm sure there's a message or a sermon in there somewhere. Because now I can just say, hey, I finished the race. I didn't give up, and I finished. And so that was an amazing accomplishment. But so that's a goal possibly to look toward. But it does take sacrifice. So there's certain foods I stopped eating, certain foods I started eating, waking up at certain times, training, things like that. But I love it because Paul uses it in the Bible as our Christian walk. That we, even like in areas of fasting, we deny our flesh. we're in control of our bodies, and we're in control whether we choose to sin or not. I mean, we're not going to be perfect, of course. We're going to fall at times, but we can dictate the things we say, where we go, our thoughts.
Right.
But we need the Word of God, because the Holy Spirit uses the Word of God to strengthen us and to keep us from sin, if we can. And so that's important for us. And if we do sin, we confess it, and He'll forgive us. And it says, the Bible says, a righteous man falls 7 times, but he gets back up every single time. So we can't stay down. We got to get back up, get back in the fight. And we need to fight for our marriages, fight for our families, fight for the church, not fight our wife and our kids, but fight for our marriage and fight for our families. Because Satan's...
For, not against. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
It's a key distinction. Well, I'm going to finish up. This has been great, by the way.
Awesome.
We could go for hours and hours, but I'm not sure that everybody would watch for hours and hours.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. I'm going to give you kind of an open question here at the end, because we just don't know who's going to watch and when.
Yeah.
Okay? Maybe 1 or 2, just whatever comes to your mind.
Yeah.
One of the biggest lessons that stick out that maybe God has taught you in your life that you want to pass on to somebody out there who may just need that.
Yeah. So it takes me back to a time when, well, I'm going to read the verse. Luke 9:23 did have this down here. If anyone desires to come after me, Jesus said, let him deny himself, take up his cross daily, and follow me. So I'll try to make this real brief, but there was a time when my son was about 5 years old. I was coaching my daughter's soccer game, and we went up to the game. The game's going to start, get ready to coach, and I look and I don't see my son. Okay. And so as a parent, okay, wait a minute or two, probably running around playing with some friends. Then another time I don't see him. So now it's been 4 or 5 minutes, and now as a parent, even that short of time, you start to get a little anxious.
Sure.
So I told the head coach, hey, I'm going to go look for my son real quick. Well, I couldn't find him at the park, and it was now 15 minutes. So I go to the snack bar, go to the restroom, walk around the field, don't see him. Now it's 20, 25 minutes, and I'm telling some of the people at the park. So they respond right away. They call the police, the deputies show up, sheriff department. They close down the park. Now there's people looking for him. And I'm beginning to, like, I guess, kind of go into shock. It's been like 30, 40 minutes.
Yeah.
Can't find him. Now I'm honestly thinking that someone took him. When we were walking through the parking lot, there was a guy who said hello to me. Now I'm thinking that guy took my son, threw him in the car, and took off. And I'm wanting the police to do an Amber Alert, but they won't do it because it's not time yet.
Right.
I'm trying to pressure them. Now it's 45 minutes, and my wife was at a women's retreat, and I was just in shock. I couldn't believe what was happening. There's a lot of these trails at a park, and I'm on this trail. Just people are looking for my son, and I'm looking for him. I'm just in tears, and just like, and this never happened to me before in my life except this one time. But I heard not an audible voice, but the Lord spoke to me, and He said, if you don't see your son again, will you still follow me? And I couldn't believe what I heard. And then I heard it again. If you don't see your son again, will you still follow me? And of course, having a relationship with God, I said, really, Lord? I go, you're really going to ask me that question right now? I go, we're trying to find Josh, and you're going to ask me this question. And it was just silent. And then I knew He was waiting for an answer. And so I had to really stop and ask myself that question seriously. If I don't see him again. And so I finally had to answer the question. And I said, yes, Lord, if I don't see Josh again, I will still follow you. And right when I said that, I guess maybe my faith, I said words of faith. And then I thought, wait a minute, I will see him again. I'll see him in heaven. And I was so sure of heaven at that moment that I will see him again. And that was the Lord. It wasn't me. And right when that happened, the police pulled up and said, I think we found your son. And so I jump in the police car. We drive up on the soccer field. And there's a lady way at the other end of the soccer field with my son. And it was like a movie scene. I got out of the police car and I'm running across the field and she's running. It was like, it would have been a good thing to film at the time.
Yeah.
And I grabbed him and I was crying, holding him. And the funny thing with him was he was fine the whole time. I guess he had a Game Boy at that time and he couldn't see because the sun. So he got under a chair and put a blanket over him.
Oh, wow.
And he was just 5. He was just like a little mound on the ground, under a blanket, under a chair, playing his Game Boy the whole time. He was fine. Meanwhile, and so since then, I've just learned that God was testing me. And so I guess to speak to other people, God will test us at times. And we see that now, the example of Abraham to sacrifice his son, God tested him. And, I pray that never happens to people with our children, but it could happen in various ways. But God, if we don't pass the test, God is like a good teacher. A good teacher will say, well, you didn't pass the test, but guess what? I'm going to have you retake it next week. I'm not going to give you a grade yet. And he's going to keep giving you that test until you get an A, because he loves you. He wants the best for you. So I'm fortunate. I praise God that I passed the test that day, that even if he were to take my son, I would still deny myself, pick up my cross, and follow him. Because at that moment, I thought I would never see him again until heaven.
Yeah.
And so it's worth it. It's worth following the Lord. It's worth denying yourself. It's worth taking up your cross daily. And it's all worth it. God has so many blessings for us. And he says there's so many blessings that we can't even imagine. And God has used my life in so many ways that I never dreamed of, that I never set up. I've been to India, which I never planned those things. I've been missions trips I've been to Israel, to Jamaica, just different situations with the police department. I didn't set any of those things up. God just loves us so much, and he wants to bless you. He wants to bless your marriage, and he wants to bless your children. But we do need to submit to his will. But it's so much better. And so that's what I would encourage people to do, to submit to the Lord. He has things so much better. And that may require saying, I'm sorry, to begin this journey, to say, forgive me to somebody. And that may usually also means you need to forgive someone else in your life. Forgive them for what they've done or what they said. And let God's love pour into you and to them. It's all worth it. Amen. But thank you, Jay. I was able to share at your church not long ago. What a blessing, the people that go to your church. And God's doing a very good work in your life and your ministry with Samaritan's Purse. And I'm so glad to the Lord that we've been able to meet and become friends.
Absolutely. Very, very much so. Likewise, I feel the same. So this has been a great podcast. And if you're watching this podcast, we want to encourage you to share it with other people. If you have not subscribed to these podcasts, this was episode 103. So there's a lot of great episodes out there. And we encourage you to subscribe so you don't miss any, and you can go back. Also, Pastor Steve, let me ask you this. If someone just really felt a connection to something you said today, and maybe they want to reach out to you, what is the best way to contact you?
Yeah. So I'm here usually during the week here at Calvary Chapel, Monrovia, and they're always welcome to come visit the church if they'd like, or if they'd like to contact the church here. So yeah, we'd love to meet them and pray with them, whatever they might need.
Absolutely. And if you are in this area towards Monrovia, we encourage you. What are the service times on Sunday?
Sunday mornings at 8 a.m. if you get up early. That's a shorter service, 9:30 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. on Sunday mornings, and Wednesday nights at 7 o'clock.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So now you know, and it's a great place to come to.
Yeah.
The Lord's doing great things here. And so we encourage you to stop on by. Yeah. And that has been it for this episode, and many more to come. Thank you so much, and may God bless each one of you. This has been the Audacious Faith Podcast, and we will see you next time.
God bless.